Welcome to How Is This Legal? Where in each episode we crack open the books to find outlandish legislation and regulations that make you ask, how is this legal? If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Here to break down what these laws mean to you is your host, Kyle Lorraine.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to How Is This Legal? We have a very exciting episode planned for you all today. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit of universal basic income, a little bit of the national debt crisis, and on our opinions on both. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone out there leaving reviews. I noticed I had 7 reviews on iTunes as of this morning. That's really great for me because it's strong social proof for anyone that's scrolling through iTunes trying to find a new show to listen to. They see that it has a good rating and it makes them want to listen to it as well. So anyone out there that's listening that hasn't left a review, I would really appreciate that. We're going to start doing some giveaways here in the future with t-shirts and stuff like that for people that do leave reviews, and anyone that has left one or leaves one in the future will automatically be eligible. Today I'm joined by 2 wonderful guests. I have Tom here from episode 4 where we talked about computer hacking and different things like that. Well, it turns out he also knows a lot about UBI, as we talked about in the episode a little bit. We also have his girlfriend Amy here, who's going to give her opinion and sort of the financial side of things, as she is an accounting major and knows a lot more about money than Tom and I do. So she's going to be able to help ground us a little bit whenever we're talking about the feasibility in terms of money and things like that. So Tom and Amy, welcome.
Thanks for having us on, Kyle.
Hello,
I appreciate it.
So I think it'd be a good place to start if we sort of define what we're going to be talking about in terms of UBI, like what our definition is.
Yeah, so there's a number of different definitions of UBI. For instance, Finland is having a trial run of UBI, and it's 600 euros a month, but it only goes to the unemployed. So there is a form of UBI that's only for people who are unemployed or who make below the poverty level in whatever country you're talking about. Then there's also universal basic income that's not connected to your wage or your employment status at all, and that's the one that I want to talk about. It's universal basic income to everybody. So for all 240 million Americans, actually no, not to children, to every adult in the United States, it would be a basic monthly check that would cover living expenses, so rent, utilities, and food on the table. And that's, I mean, there's a lot of people who will disagree about the exact definition because there's tons of different definitions of UBI, but that's the one I want to address here today.
Okay, and I think I'm pretty on board with that too in terms of UBI being something that I think a lot of the numbers we saw thrown around were roughly $1,000 a month seems to be the magic number and would obviously be $12,000 a year. And statistically speaking, it should be enough to put the average American above the federal poverty line, depending on, obviously that depends on where you're living, which we're going to get into a little bit, because if you live in Chicago, it's going to be more expensive than living in Carbondale, for example, where we're at. So I think it's important that we understand that for our purposes, it's going to be sort of the basic income as like a floor of what you need to sort of survive. So we're not suggesting that, at least not yet, we're not suggesting that we should have everyone making 6 figures a year from free government money, because there's an obvious question of where that's going to come from and potential consequences might be amplified and so forth. So I guess just starting off, I know you're a big proponent of this whole construct, Tom, so I'm going to let you take the floor and state your position of why you think this would be a good idea, some of the arguments for universal basic income.
Yeah, so I don't even think that this should be an argument. I think that it should already be discussed in Congress. Universal basic income is a necessity. It's not some liberal idea that, hey, let's make sure no one's poor in this country, although that is a great thing. This is an absolute necessity, and mainly because of automation. In the next 20 years, there's an estimated 80 million jobs in the United States that will be lost to automation. And obviously, cashiers and truck drivers and all these are the number one at risk, but it's also loan officers, telemarketers, dispatchers, taxi drivers, legal assistants. The list goes on and on. And what we need to figure out what we're going to do to those people who lose their jobs to automation that can't find other jobs. And when you talk about unemployment levels, that's when you realize the universal basic income isn't a conversation or isn't a debate, it's a necessity. Now, how we roll it out can be debated, but it is a necessity. The worst unemployment levels of the Great Depression reached 25%. And we can all agree that the Great Depression was a national catastrophe. and it forced Congress to act immediately. Well, the same thing needs to be done about automation. And as Amy's going to get into a little bit here, we're having this debate a little bit sooner than if it was sooner than we suspected because of this whole fight for 15 and a lot of fast food chains and realtors saying, okay, I'm not going to pay you $15 an hour. I'm going to find a robot who will do the job better than you anyways. But yeah, basically, I don't think that you need arguments for this other than the fact that a large portion of our workforce, if not 50% of it, is going to lose their job in the next 20 years due to automation. And when you combine that with the fact that Social Security is going to take a 25% hit by 2034, we're going to need to do something to supplement everybody's income. And putting everyone on welfare isn't an option. And so I think it would be much more prudent for us to discuss universal basic income. And rather than just giving it to that 40 or 50% of the population that loses their jobs to automation, we need to start talking about giving it to everybody, because I think the effects on our economy can actually prove that it's incredibly beneficial, and you can get rid of a lot of the economic anxiety, not just for the people who are without a job, but for the people who still have a job but are just borderline hanging in there, that are just paying their bills and scraping by every month. So yeah, those are just a few basic reasons why we need universal basic income and why it really shouldn't be a debate. It should be a discussion.
And I think it's important to note, I don't know if you addressed it or not, I'm just over here doing something, but the money that you get from UBI can be spent on whatever you want in sort of the traditional construction of it. It's money that's being sent to you that doesn't have anything conditions attached or anything like that. You can spend it on whatever you want. So then, along with this whole fight for 15 thing, the argument commonly gets advanced that if we're giving all this money to people, that they're going to quit their jobs and they're going to just spend all the money on drugs and alcohol is something that gets thrown around a lot. And something I've sort of discovered in looking into this is that the sort of the broke drug addict alcoholic is kind of a stereotype, because based on a statistics in the United States, people that receive welfare or that live below the poverty line purchase less alcohol and cigarettes, at least, than people that are above, I think it was like $120,000 a year or something like that, which would put them in the middle class, maybe upper middle class, depending on where they live. So there's a lot of sort of stereotypes surrounding this that I think are important to get out, because there's also the stereotype that if you give people money that they're going to stop working. So they did this in, I don't know if you guys saw this, but it was in Germany, I believe, in 1970, in the 70s, or Canada in 1970. They gave everyone like $1,000 a month in this control group of people. They had people from pretty much all socioeconomic classes that they were giving this to. And they found that less than 1% of the people stopped working, and the 1%, at least the majority of them that did stop working, it was to take care of their children. And then the hours worked only decreased by 10%, pretty much across the board. And a lot of the time that people weren't working, they were using that time to seek further education or to start a business, different things like that, creative passions, like we're doing here, all that kind of stuff. So I think that I just kind of wanted to get those out there, and then I'm going to kick it over to you, Amy, to talk about the whole fight for 15, because I know that was a hot topic before we started recording here.
Well, really quick, I do want to comment. I appreciate you bringing that up, that giant misconception, because I didn't note it. But yeah, there's this giant misconception that if you give people free money, they'll stop working. But as you mentioned, the study in Germany, but also the Alaska Permanent Fund Dividend, which is basically, it's a form of universal basic income set up because of all the oil revenue that Alaska has, and it's something like $2,000 a year. So again, it's a lot less than we're talking about for universal basic income, or my idea of it. But just like you said, a study recently found that only 1% of the only 1% of Alaska residents worked less because of the PDF, and part-time working actually went up 17%. So again, this is a small sample size, but I think that across the board, you'll find similar studies show that forms of UBI do not cause people to just sit down and stop working. They actually cause innovation, and they cause people to keep driving. But yeah, anyways, Amy, sorry to interrupt.
Let's see. So I think that it is very important to express that this is not just an out of nowhere philosophy that we need to come up with a way to fight automation, that it is there are driving forces that will inevitably end up here. And I think one of them is the fight for 15. I think that if you drastically take, I think, what's the minimum wage in Illinois? $8.50, let's say.
8.75, I think.
8.75. Okay, let's say tomorrow they enact this and it's $15 an hour. That's like a little over 80%. What are the ramifications of that? What are what is going to be the fallout? Let's say, people say that there's not going to be an increase in prices of a Big Mac or anything like that, but there will be. There absolutely will be. And if you ask the CEO of McDonald's what he's going to do to try to counteract that, I think he's going to look to you and say, I'm going to replace your job with an iPad. I've actually had this conversation with our old boss. We worked together in Macomb, Illinois, and I messaged her one day and I said, what would you do if you had to start paying, because I was a server, so my minimum wage was $4.95. And I said, what would you do if you had to start paying me $15 an hour? She said, there'd be iPads on every table. So for people to, and that was a very small business. And I think I've heard a lot of arguments from the Fight for 15 people that say, well, then they just shouldn't be in business. And that doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you will find is with the increased automation is that you will have more unemployed people. And I just think it's important to establish that it's going to end up here and how we're going to get there if we're not careful with the minimum wage that we are asking for.
Sure, because, basic economics, if we have more money, it's going to be worth less and things are going to cost
Right.
more and so forth. But I think because, I'm contradicting the shit out of myself because in the computer episode before I had even like a basic understanding, I disagreed with a lot of this whole concept, because I sort of just assumed that if people were just given free money that it would make everything more expensive. But what they found is that when, at least back to this 1970 experiment in Canada, when they were giving out this $12,000 a year, their GDP actually increased because people had more money to spend, and it was able to keep prices at a competitive level.
Sure.
Which I found pretty interesting.
I am curious to know, when you said that they were more likely to go get an education, what the price of education was. Because we know here the price of education is like astronomically going up with inflation. So
Sure.
So I think the other end to this conversation is, if not UBI, then what? Let's say people are just staunchly against this idea. Well, then where is the other side of the market going to drop? That means you have to put in laws that say that you can't charge people a certain amount over for rent or for education or for healthcare. We can't do that. That's going to be way harder than just putting out a universal basic income. So you have to pick one or the other. Are costs going to go down or are incomes going to go up? Which would be easier to implement? And I think UBI is the most logical and definitely streamlinable approach to it, other than...
I think what I like about it is that it still has, like I'm saying, with people spending more and stuff like that, it still has a lot of capitalist free market
yeah.
whole idea behind it. It's able to survive as sort of a social policy in a capitalistic
Mm-hmm.
society, which I think is pretty ideal. But I still am just skeptical of where the money's going to come from. And I think that there's a few different options that we could look at. And I think another thing we should probably get into is how this universal basic income could be an improvement from the current welfare system. And I think that if we were able to get rid of the current welfare system and use the money that we're saving from not having all these jobs and, having these government buildings and people drive, all the different moving parts of a business, different bureaucrats that are working there, if those jobs are eliminated and the money that's going out for welfare is not going out anymore, then that leaves a real potential for us to use that money and supplement it typically by decreasing anything that's that we don't consider a priority in the country, is like how other countries do it. So obviously it wouldn't be defense spending and things like that, but there's probably a lot of other areas that we could find to cut in order to make this more of a reality. But I know you had some interesting stuff, because I saw you perk up over there, Tom, when I mentioned where's the money going to come from.
Can I just one thing to clear up? Are you are you saying that we are consolidating our welfare programs? Because I think it's semantics to say it's not welfare. It's the same thing, but you're
Sure.
saying but there's going to be less departments that it's all run out of?
Yeah, because I think if it's universal basic, if everybody's getting the same amount of money and there's no conditions attached to it, then that eliminates a lot of jobs because you don't have to apply for so many jobs per month. That means you don't have to check in with somebody and say, I applied for X amount of jobs or,
Well,
whatever.
let's discuss the jobs that would go away then. You would have unemployment offices, obviously.
Sure.
That would be one. Instead of there being a WIC office, do you know what WIC is?
No, I don't.
WIC is like it's women, infants, and children. It's like a form of food stamps, but it's for like pregnant women and women with young children where they only get like peanut butter and baby formula. So it's a form of food stamps kind of. Where is food stamps department of? So you get rid of all these tiny offices is what you're saying, and it would just be one large office.
Sure. Yeah, it would just
Why
be.
do you think that? I guess I'm asking, do you think that would be less jobs or just consolidated into one department?
I would think it'd be less jobs because there's a lot of less moving parts because if we're doing this, we're also talking about getting rid of things like food stamps that are heavily regulated and conditioned in terms of like what you can and can't buy, how much you qualify for, what places accept them, all those kind of things. So if we don't have any person that has to like check on these and distribute them and figure out who's getting them, who's eligible, if everybody's eligible, you could presumably pay like one, maybe not one person obviously, but maybe like 10 or 15 people that are just sort of there, maybe IT people that are making sure that money's being dispersed and have like a customer service center where people call in and say like, hey, I changed my bank account, stuff like that.
Right.
Or a website. Like we're at a point with automation and everything that we could use so much of that. We could employ robots to send money out to people. So I think that, yes, I'm suggesting consolidating all of these existing assistance programs and then using sort of technology to make this a more streamlined process. And there's less moving parts, which in my mind will equate to less jobs.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to get rid of a ton of jobs. No one has to review applications anymore. If everyone's
Do you think people are the government's going to vote on that though?
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? I mean, you're gonna.
I see what she's saying though, because they're going to want to. You're saying they're going to want to protect their jobs.
Right.
They're going to want to protect their own kind of.
I mean, if everyone else is losing jobs to automation, why? And a lot of those jobs would be lost to automation regardless. Loan officers is one of the. Today it's like 99% of loan officers risk losing their jobs to automation in the next 20 years. So
why is that?
That's because computers can do the algorithm just as well as and if faster than humans can. Computers can crunch all the numbers and spit out a yes, you qualify for this loan, no you don't.
Probably be a lot more fair too.
Yeah, so for applications for food stamps and stuff, it wouldn't be a human looking over it. It'd be a computer saying this person makes X amount of money a year and they qualify for everything else. So yeah, so I think those jobs will be replaced by before we even get to UBI. I think a lot of those jobs will be replaced by robots. Very few jobs are safe from robots. HR, I think, will be safe. Lawyers will be safe.
Why do you think lawyers?
Trial lawyers specifically, but you don't. So some legal jobs, I think, will fall to automation, but the law it's all about how you interpret a law, and you can't have robots. I guess you could have a robot spit out two different interpretations, but I think it's too complex. And maybe that's just because I'm in law school and I don't want to.
I think criminal lawyers will be fine, but I don't think lawyers overall will be. Like we talked about earlier, with workman's comp lawyers.
Yeah, and I think
less people, less workman's comp.
It's interesting. I thought this was a low number because I do kind of agree with you, but the same website said it was like 3.5%. Lawyers were only at 3.5% risk for losing their jobs due to automation, which was incredibly low. But yeah, I mean, I think there's possibility some lawyers lose their jobs. But back to the original argument. So you would get rid of a lot of these jobs, and one of the ways you pay for UBI is you cut the $1 trillion a year we spend in welfare. You cut everything. You cut food stamps, you cut all that. It's all replaced by universal basic income. Now, universal basic income, at least at $1,000 a month, is expected to cost us $2.7 trillion annually. So you get rid of $1 trillion. You got to figure out where the rest comes from. I think it was Bill Gates suggested that we tax robots, and I brought that up on our previous episode. I said, if you tax robots so that the company's still saving money, not paying a human to do the job, they're still making money, you might be able to convince Congress to pass some sort of robot tax. But today, I found an even better idea, and it goes to.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. No, this is one of my favorite topics is space law. Not a lot of people are interested in the field, though I think they will be over time. But
We just can't get up there as easily yet.
no, not yet. Although,
Once we can take a bus up there, everyone will probably be interested in it.
yeah, actually, once we can take mining equipment
We
up
didn't
there.
have to work 40 hours a week. Maybe we could develop a way to get up there faster.
Well, I think we can get up there fast enough. I think it's just how cost effective is it. And for example, and I don't know anything about rockets, so listeners, if I'm wrong, I apologize. But the Falcon 9, the Falcon 9 Heavy, the one that Elon Musk recently launched into space and then had the boosters land back down on Earth, if you look at how much that money, how much is saved because he can reuse the boosters, it's amazing how economically efficient space travel becomes. And that was just one of the first examples of people doing it, but that will become huge. And it's all about reusing the same rockets to get up to space and not having to dump them into the ocean like most rockets do. So Elon Musk is going to be huge in all this. But anyways, so I had to do a presentation on space law earlier this year, and one of the reasons
What class did you do that for?
international law.
I guess it's international.
Yeah, of course it's international. And one of the reasons that I was so interested in it is because I truly think that once we start mining, it'll become like the gold rush again. We'll have a celestial gold rush, if you will. And there are treaties in place that currently say that you can't mine any object in space unless it's for the benefit of all mankind. But the United States also passed the Space Act, which said that U.S. companies could go and try to benefit financially from outer space. But anyways, it's kind of just beside the point. Whether it's legal or not is beside the point for now. What is interesting, though, is how much money is in space. In 2015, an asteroid that came, I think it was 1.5 million miles away from the Earth, so it's quite a distance, but still kind of close enough for us to see it. It had $5 trillion worth of platinum in it. $5 trillion worth of platinum in this one asteroid alone. And then if you dig even deeper, NASA suspects that in the asteroid belt, which is in between Mars and Neptune, I think, maybe it's Jupiter, Mars and Neptune and Jupiter, two of the planets, there's 700 quintillion worth of minerals. That's $100 billion for every single person on this planet right now. A just massive, massive amount of money. And while we are far away from actually mining it, I do think we need to look into exploiting space for financial gain. And I think mankind as a whole will be better off for it. Now, what kind of, who knows? We could go up there and start blowing up asteroids, and there's these terrible, unexpected consequences, like we all die a fiery death from an asteroid falling down to Earth. That's possible. But the financial impact of mining asteroids and celestial bodies is way too great for us to ignore. And I think if we can figure out how to do it in a relative, in the next 100 years, I don't think we'll be talking about how we're paying for universal basic income. I think we'll be living very well off financially. But yeah, I thought that was the most interesting idea on how we fund universal basic income is we really start exploring how to mine asteroids. We have to make it cost effective to mine it first, but the minerals are up there. There's gold, there's titanium, there's platinum, there's silver, there's iron ore. There's plenty of minerals to mine, and there's more than enough to go around, at least at first. So yeah, I thought that would be a really interesting idea to start exploring. The problem is we need UBI within the next 20 years, and this could be 50 year off, 100 years off. We don't know. But the money is out there. And that kind of.
Do you really think we're 100 years off from that, though?
I think we're closer to 100 than we are to 20. Because, again, you need to make it cost effective. And so I think Elon Musk launching the Falcon 9 or the Falcon Heavy or whatever it was a tremendous start. I wish I remembered what this chart said, but there was this fantastic chart that had every major heavy rocket from all the different countries. So China, the United States, a couple of private firms, and Elon Musk's. And Elon Musk's number was a fraction of what everyone else was paying to launch these Falcon Heavies. And I remember asking someone about it at the time, hey, how much of this has to do with the fact that the boosters are reusable? And the person said everything. That's why it's so economically efficient, is because we're reusing it, because we don't have to start from the scratch every single time. And that launch was incredibly, incredibly effective. effective is not the word, but it was successful. It was incredibly successful. I think they lost one booster, but it was a huge success. And as long as these space organizations, both public and private, start to try to make space travel more cost effective, then space mining, I'm telling you, it's going to be the next gold rush. And that actually is an interesting legal conversation about what we do when there's disputes in space. My my suggestion was that we set up basically arbitration 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 courts in space. So
Are they always in space, or do you have to come back to Earth to go to court?
I think they have to be in space.
Okay.
I mean,
That's fine with me.
I just kind of want them to be in space. I'm sure you could go back to court, or you could go back to Earth to go to court, but I love
How big
the
of a
idea.
pain in the ass would it be to go to court then if you had to go to space?
Exactly. Well, and what my fear is that when we do, and we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, but my fear is that when we eventually, why I brought this all back to the gold rush is because a lot of the property law at the time came about because of the gold rush, because people didn't know what to do when they got there, and it oftentimes led to violence. So we very quickly need to institute a series of laws that could determine, who found the gold first, who has title to that land, yada, yada, yada. And I'm worried that if we just send a bunch of companies into space to start mining asteroids, what happens when two companies get to the same asteroid? And, who owns that asteroid? Who owns the minerals that they're mining from it? Sure, at first you can probably say there's enough to go around. We'll be over here. You'll be over here. But I worry eventually that won't be the case. And eventually it will be. We need to have a set of stringent laws in place to determine what happens when disputes arise in space. And currently it's not even a law, besides the Space Act, but the only treaties in place are the Outer Space Treaty, which has been ratified by like 190 countries. That's pretty good. We break treaties all the time, so I don't know how much weight it holds. But it just says, you can't militarize space. You have to, if you mine anything from space, it has to be to the benefit of all mankind. Then there's the Moon Treaty, which is much more specific. But the problem with the Moon Treaty is the only spacefaring country to ratify it is India. And India doesn't even do manned space flights, I don't believe. But Mexico's ratified it, India's ratified it, and a couple other countries. But none of the major spacefaring countries like China, Russia, or the United States have ratified it. And it's been around since like 1972 or something like that. So it's very clear that the United States wants nothing to do. They don't want to be constricted by a set of international laws on what they can do in the in outer space. Neither does Russia, neither does China. But we all need to come together and figure out a set of. We're getting way off topic here.
I just want to.
I'm enjoying the conversation.
I think that when you said that at first it would be fine, and then eventually there might be an issue with other countries and some type of war or whatever, I think quite the opposite will happen. I think that since there's so much space and so many of these minerals, there's only so much we can bring back. And if once, let's say this continues on for decades and decades, we'll have so much on Earth, the value will be nothing. And I just think that it would be the opposite. I think that if there's going to be any conflict, it would be initially.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, that's a really good point. So part of this also has to do with, yes, eventually there'd be so much of it that it wouldn't have much value. But there's so much about space that we don't know that I think we will always find something of value. And one of the things that I really found interesting is what happens when we find something in space that we don't have on Earth that can truly, truly change the way we live. Then there's, how much is that worth? And what's that going to do if there's a limited amount of that in space and two companies are trying to get it? That's what worries me, not so much the titanium and the platinum and the $700 quintillion worth of minerals in the asteroid belt alone. What happens when we find something that's even more valuable and even more life-changing? And then what,
Well, I think we can sort of, at least for now, rule out the idea of war because, the U.S. is going to get there based on a private company, because of a private company, whether it's SpaceX or Boeing. Pretty much those two are the front runners right now. Jeff Bezos might build a rocket or something, but the government doesn't have enough money to get there. Like we couldn't get there on our own, goodwill. We need these private companies. So I think maybe a wartime situation could come into place if like Russia or China or something like that is able to get there at the same time as we are. But I mean, presumably they won't be able to because we're the only ones that are putting cars in space at this particular point. And I just think, sort of tying this back into our conversation, that it's pretty fucking insane that we're going to go to the next planet or get a mineral from space because of a private company. Like, if that doesn't show you how much capitalism works, I don't know what does. Because like, even when we had this, the only reason we got there with the government, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, I don't know all of them, but a lot of it was because of the space race. We wanted to be the first country to get to the moon. And now we have this where it's a market activity to be the first company that exploits space and makes it like monetizes it, which is just unbelievable. It's crazy.
See, and my biggest concern when I say that I think there will be conflicts, I don't necessarily mean between countries, but this is my fear. This is what I always go back to on why I think we need such a stringent set of space laws if we're going to get into this. And not only because I want to be a space law lawyer, because that'd be the coolest thing in the world, but just because it generally fascinates me. Imagine this. Imagine two companies up on a planet, up on an asteroid somewhere in outer space. A dispute arises. What happens when one of those companies chooses to take it to the next level and to sabotage equipment, to do something that could potentially make it harder for that company to return to Earth, to potentially risk another worker's life because of a dispute over mining on an asteroid in a place where there are no laws? And then what happens when that information gets back down to Earth, and then how do those countries react? If it's a company from Russia and a company from the United States, how does the company from the country that's been harmed, or how does the company that's been harmed, how does that country respond? Because they'd have to have a response to make sure it didn't happen again.
Oh, hell yeah.
And so that's what I worry, that not so much two different countries are going up there flying under their flags, scientists and all that. I worry that more of the private companies getting into disputes on asteroids or on celestial bodies, and then how do the countries respond to protect those companies? So that's more where I would want the stringent laws because of that. And that's why I kept bringing it back to the gold rush, because it was the wild, wild west, and that's what we're going to have. We're going to have the wild, wild west of space. Maybe Will Smith will do a new movie, because that could be that could be very interesting.
It's like Men in Black meets the Wild, Wild
yeah.
West.
Oh, hell yeah. That's an awesome idea.
Or Space Jam meets Wild Wild West.
There you go. Think of the soundtracks.
I'm gonna email.
That'd be awesome.
I'm gonna email Will Smith later. Tell him to start.
I'm sure he'll get back to you
Hit him
right
up
away.
on Instagram.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about a movie about space law and mining precious minerals in space. You in?
But I do really, realistically, I think space law will become. I think you'll be able to take space law in every law school in the country in 30 to 40 years. I really think it's going to become, and even faster if Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Boeing and all of these countries really try to ramp it up a little bit. But there are no laws. There's one treaty, and if there's anything about treaties, major world powers really don't mind breaking them. And there's really not a lot of consequence for breaking them. There is no, a lot of these treaties have no teeth. And so I think the development of space laws can be a really, really interesting thing, and I'm excited because I'm excited to, and I won't be in school by then, but I'll be able to follow it, and I'll be able to write about it, and it'll be my little pet project.
Okay, so you've talked about, like, in the long run where this money would come from, but what about where it would come from initially? How do you get people on board with this, with the current state of, people want lower taxes, people want, how would you convince someone where the money's going to come from initially?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So like I said earlier, you're going to get rid of $1 trillion worth of welfare spending right off the bat. So that's about...
Well, you're initially just increasing that.
Yeah. Oh, no, you are. But you bring down the $2.7 trillion that'll cost to roll this out to now $1.7 trillion. So now where do you get the other $1.7 trillion? Well, you could tax robots. You could decrease military funding, which would raise a lot of flags for people who are against this idea to begin with. I'm absolutely fine with it, but that's another conversation.
Do you think marijuana would be a necessity?
Yeah, I think you legalize marijuana and you tax the hell out of it. I think that's one place. But
I think you run into a potential problem there though too, because like there's already a thriving black market for marijuana like across the country, even in places that it is legal, because if they raise the taxes too much and it becomes too expensive, people can go down the street and buy it from their old dealer or whatever. That person can still have it imported from Mexico or Canada. So I think that's a fine idea, but I think you run the risk of maybe creating another problem in that
Well,
problem.
the more you iron out those laws, though, you just go the same way you go ticket someone for not having a business license. You go to the person who's selling weed on the side, and ticket them for not having a business license.
Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with Amy on that, and I think that's a small percentage of the population because when you roll out legalizing marijuana in all 50 states, the people who will start utilizing that aren't exactly the people that had the high percentage of people that'll start utilizing it aren't people who had dealers before. I think a lot of people it'll be a new thing for them and they'll want to go to the store to get it as opposed to your more savvy pot users who do have so and so's number from down the street and can call them up and get $10 less than they pay at the local dispensary.
Mm-hmm.
But back to how we pay for this. So you brought up that Germany's economy actually grew. And the Roosevelt Institute in New York did a study, not a study, I guess, yeah, it is a study. But they suggested that over 8 years after rolling out UBI, the economy could grow by 12.5%, which is essentially $2.5 trillion over that 8 years. They say it goes down significantly if you only give $500 a month in UBI. This 12.5% increase is based off $1,000 a month in UBI. So I do think that you will have some natural growth resulting from UBI. But to be honest, there's no way to pay for it entirely. This will never be a zero-sum game. And I think that's okay. I think we need to be okay with that because not everything is a zero-sum game. We spend a lot of money on a lot of different things in the United States that we don't get money back for. And this is going to be one of those things. And so the goal is getting it as close to zero as possible, but it doesn't need to be at zero because, again, this isn't something that would be good for the United States or for the world. This is something that will be necessary. And when you have something that's necessary, you don't talk about how to make it cost $0. You talk about how to make it cost as little as possible. And that's where we're at right now. So whether it's taxing robots, in addition to getting rid of welfare, in addition to eventually the money we'll make by space mining, there's ways to get it close to zero. But if all people want to do is talk about how to make it a zero-sum game, it'll never be that. At least I don't think it will be.
So if we have the system where it's going to continually be $2.7 trillion per year, and we don't have a way to even get it off the ground, what do you guys think that would? I mean, obviously it's going to increase the national debt, but how does that square with our current rate? Because I mean, I know there's the billboards and stuff like that have the national debt on there, and it's always upping by the thousands, if not millions, every couple seconds. So I mean, if we're continually adding another 2.7 trillion on there, isn't that a potential concern as well?
Yeah. See, the national debt conversation annoys me because I get it. The national debt is huge, but the people who really hate the national debt want to go after entitlements. They call them entitlements, welfare. That's what they want to use. They want to get rid of entitlements to try to get rid of the national debt. What the people who are truly scared of the national debt will never touch is military spending. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. We spend way too much money on the military. And I agree that we need a strong military to keep our borders safe and to keep our country safe.
Space borders.
Yeah, but how many... name me one country that could launch an effective attack on the United States without being obliterated. China's the closest, but even China could not launch a land invasion. China could launch rockets, but they could never launch a land invasion on the United States with what their military is now. Simply couldn't do it. Wouldn't even get close.
Do you mean with people, or do you mean with
people,
implements?
With people. The United States is the only country in the world that can launch land invasions on any other country it wants to. It could be boots on the ground in any country whenever it wanted, and no country could have boots on the ground in the United States. So I think
don't you kind of like that though? I mean, it makes me feel pretty good.
I do kind of like it, but it also how many bad actors are there? How many countries truly want to do damage to the United States? And I think some people will tell you it's a large amount, but as we advance more in society, wars are going to become obsolete. Absolutely obsolete. The second that we find the second that we find intelligent life on another planet, we're not going to have wars on Earth anymore. We're just not. And if we do, then we're stupid. Then we're absolutely stupid.
Well,
and we
we're
need to
stupid.
Well, we are. But if that's the case, then we need to find new world leaders. Because if we find life on another planet and we're still focused on fighting each other in our backyards, then I don't know. I don't think we can be saved. At that point, just send the asteroid down and kill us all, because we're past saving at that point. We need to move away from large scale wars. I get that our presence in the Middle East is necessary to ensure stability, because that is a real issue. But if you look at how much money we spend on our military compared to anything else, I really want someone to look me in the eye and tell me that military spending is more important than spending on education.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think that's ridiculous. We need, and it blows my mind that in 2018 we still have the Speaker of the House, one of the most prominent Republicans, talking about entitlement reform after he just gave the biggest boost to the military ever. We don't need to be taking money away from poor people right now. What we need to do is we need to be pouring money into education so we can get back on pace with China, which is vastly outperforming our students in every subject in the world. It's amazing how much money we spend on protecting our people in this country, but we don't spend on enhancing their ability to live or enhancing their life.
And I think that's a great segue back into the universal basic income argument, is because that is one profession that will not go away. You're not going to have a teacher replaced by a robot.
I don't know.
You don't think so?
I don't know, like, if they're all going to be replaced, but, like, I don't know, just look at YouTube, for example, or like iTunes University. Like, there's a lot of stuff that people can learn from a very centralized
I like grade
person.
school teachers.
Grade school teachers maybe not, but like
That's what I'm saying.
But pretty
So-
much once you reach the age of being able to use a computer, which is like getting lower and lower every generation. I mean, like, my nephew's 2 years old and he can turn on an iPad and find a video on YouTube. It's like, how much longer before like they could conceivably be able to learn their ABCs and whatnot through an iPad? But I don't think they'll always. I mean, I'll agree with you. I don't think they're always.
They still have to be watched.
They're totally going to
like
be
they're
wiped
going to
out.
need an adult. You know?
Yeah, someone to supervise them, and their parents probably won't do it.
Yeah, and robots can't. Well, I guess that's something I didn't think about of if there are more people that can stay home. Let's say you can be a stay-at-home mom because you don't have to work to survive. I wonder what would happen with education then if you can just turn on YouTube and be the one that's supervising your kid. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, but there's a lot of people too, though, like yourself and my girlfriend, like that probably wouldn't be okay with just doing nothing. Like, you guys are getting degrees or pursuing business endeavors, things like that. Like you're hungry for more in life than just being like the traditional stay-at-home mom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be hard for us to sort of revert back to that, like, 1950s like mindset where like it's a woman's place to stay in the kitchen and stuff like that.
Right. Oh no, I don't think it's so much that. It's just that some people can't not work.
Yeah, there's definitely,
Yeah.
because like we were talking about off air, is that like people need some kind of purpose, and when they stop having that purpose is when, like, I mean, after people retire, like all-cause mortality like goes through the roof, and like a lot of unexplainable things start happening because people they have no purpose in life.
Right.
They have no drive to get out of bed. I mean, because like working is what defines us in a lot of
Yeah.
respects. Like, like going to law school, like, or being an accountant or whatever, like you define yourself based on your occupation, like what you provide to this world, what value you provide.
Yeah. Well, I don't really think a lot of people go and, grow up when they're little dreaming of being an accountant.
Probably not.
Probably
not a lawyer either. Maybe like some of the, maybe some of the cool ones on
disagree.
TV.
I'd say Jack McCoy made me like it. It's the debate. It's the passion of the debate that I think that motivates a lot of lawyers. I don't think you never watch someone crunching numbers and was like, yeah, I want to do that.
I want to go back to what's wrong with our country for a second, because you just
Oh,
made
I
me
just
think-
want to keep it on education real quick. And
Okay, yeah,
what
yeah, go for
UBI
it.
would happen with education is I think that we were talking about this at home, that people can you hear me?
Yeah, you were good.
That what were you saying? That what is the average income for teachers? Like 20?
I don't know. I threw out 40. I don't know how
I
accurate
don't
that
It's
is.
pretty
it's that-
high. I think
yeah, I
it's
don't
like
think it's that
32
high.
or something like that.
32. Okay.
So what do you think would happen with the quality of teachers if they had a let's say $15,000 head start a year?
Oh, I think it would improve. And I mean, I'll stipulate that teachers need to be paid more. Like the shit they deal with, and like the amount of education they have to get and certifications they have to have and the money they spend to like do things in their classroom, like, you know, projects or, you know, decorations, shit like that. Like, it's ridiculous that they get paid less than a lot of people that are serving me a burger and fries
Right.
when they're educating the youth of our
And so
country.
I think when choosing a major, a lot of people that may be really gifted at teaching decide not to even bother because they won't be compensated fairly for it. So
Sure.
you might see a higher quality of education if they were actually, you know, compensated fairly. So I think that would help advance the position of America if we actually had quality teachers because they were being paid fairly due to universal basic income.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think you'll find that with a lot of like social workers too.
Right.
Because social
Yeah.
workers was right up there on the list of jobs that will never be automated. So I think you will find in these important fields that we tend to neglect and not pay for, you will find more people willing to take that pay cut because the UBI is supplementing their income. But when you talked about what happens when people lose their purpose in life, so there's this. I'm working on a case right now, and it basically I had to figure out what the average lifespan for a juvenile in prison was. So if someone's sentenced when they're 16, 17 years old and they're sentenced to, 40 years or life, well, if they're sentenced to life imprisonment, how long does that person live in prison? And I found some really interesting statistics. And the most interesting was that since 1980, I want to say, we are 2 years behind in life expectancy than we should have been and compared to comparable countries. So I think we rank like 29th right now in life expectancy, right by Cuba and another country that you wouldn't expect us to be right by in life expectancy. But the most fascinating part is that 2.5 years of life expectancy that we lost is directly related to our mass incarceration. We lost, on average, 2.5 years of life expectancy because we incarcerate that many people that it actually impacted the United States life expectancy, which completely blew my mind. So if we're talking about how to pay for UBI, we need to get rid of private prisons. That the only reason they make a profit is people keep getting locked up. And while I agree that we need a strict criminal justice system that, if you do the crime, you do the time kind of thing, but we've surpassed every single comparable country tenfold in terms of how much we incarcerate people, and it's absolutely ridiculous in this day and age. And if we start phasing out mass incarceration, we start legalizing marijuana, we stop imprisoning people because they're too poor to pay their bail, then you will see...
Or because they have some drug issues.
Yeah. Well, and I actually have a problem with it. Now that I work at the public defender's office in the county over, and I do see a lot of drug addicts who they've been given the opportunity to get help, and they just keep going back to the same thing over and over again. And eventually, you need a punitive. You need to punish them. It can no longer be extend the helping hand. But I don't think we extend the helping hand to them in the first place enough. But eventually, yes, we still need prisons. We need to get rid of private prisons. We were on our way to doing that. I think Eric Holder, Obama's attorney general, had planned to phase out all private federal prisons. Not all private prisons, all private federal prisons by like 2020. And I think they were supposed to get down to 5 private federal prisons in 2018. And of course, that's been reversed under Jeff Sessions. And we can, two reasonable minds can argue whether that's good or bad. I get that there are arguments on both sides. I just don't think the arguments on the other side are very good.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the arguments for profit.
Because you're basically I think what they would say is that they're doing the state a service by allowing the state has a number of bad actors that they need to imprison, and it's expensive for the states to imprison them. So what they do with federal prisons, what private prisons do is they say, hey, we'll take all of your bad actors that you can't house, and we're going to put them to work, and we're going to pay them 5 cents a day, and we're also going to collect money from the state for every prisoner that we have. And we're just going to make sure that we feed them and house them, and the medical treatment that we give them never exceeds what we're getting from the state and what we're making from these prisoners. The only reason that these private prisons exist is to create a profit. So we're profiting off of prisoners, which makes absolutely zero sense to me. Why are we allowing this? Because if you profit off prisoners, then it's reasonable to think that those prisons want more prisoners. And so why do we keep giving them? You can't tell. I mean, I don't know how many people are incarcerated, millions. But you can't tell me that all of those people need to be incarcerated. And you can't tell me that if we got rid of private prisons, the justice system would seriously look at what people should be incarcerated and what people shouldn't be incarcerated. And I think we would whittle down that number to a more reasonable level.
And it may be because you started on this a few minutes ago, but what was the link between this and the...
Yeah, so idle hands. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about people people need a purpose.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that I think UBI will work. But going back to, people not having a purpose, well, people in prison generally don't have a purpose. And because we've imprisoned so many people, our life expectancy has actually gone down 2.5 years compared to what it should be. Which I mean, again, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But I think that kind of backs up the point that people in prison, there's a number of reasons for lesser quality of life in prison. There's a number of reasons that you die sooner in prison than as opposed to when you're out. But it's not just the food you eat or the medical treatment you get. It's about quality of life, and it's about you have no purpose in life and you slowly deteriorate. And in the same study said that your life expectancy, once you're released from prison, about 10 to 15 years after you've been released from a moderate prison stay, your life expectancy regains. It's back to where you are. But being in prison, not only on a national level, but on an individual level, if you're incarcerated, your life expectancy goes down even when you've been released. And it takes a while for your life expectancy to go back up. And a large part of that is just based on what having no purpose does to a person. And that's why I think UBI will not create this entire group of people who sit around and do nothing. I truly think people will still be productive. And like I said in the last podcast, I think you're going to see a second renaissance. I think you're going to see people who, now that they have this safety net, will branch out and will do things that they, they'll create an Etsy shop like Kyle's doing. He created this podcast. If Kyle only had to do this podcast and tried to make money off of it, and that was all he was doing, I mean, I think, Kyle, you would agree with me on this, that you wouldn't just sit around and do nothing. You'd devote your life to something that you felt gave you a purpose. And whether it's this podcast, or I know you're really into fitness and bodybuilding and all that, whatever it is, you would focus your time and energy into that, whether you make money or not, and it would give you a purpose. And I think a large percentage of the population would do the same.
Okay, I have a devil's advocate question.
Okay.
So this is something that plagues the welfare system right now, but what do you do with number of children? I
mean, I don't think it matters.
Do you get more if you have more children?
I think that's an interesting question. Yeah, I would assume that you'd have to.
Right. Well, so how do you stop people from sitting around and having kids?
I don't think you should get more because you have more kids, because then it doesn't look like a universal basic income. It looks like welfare a lot more. And
so how do you, if let's say they enact this next week, is you shouldn't get the same amount as your neighbor who doesn't have any children and you have 4, because your rent is going to be more because you need more bedrooms. So it's not really covering all of your necessary, your expenses if you have 4 children.
It's really interesting.
And then how would you stop people from taking advantage of that?
Yeah. No, this is
the way they take care of welfare now. Take advantage now.
Yeah, that's the biggest flaw in UBI that I've come across, and I can't believe I hadn't heard about it before now. What do you do?
The biggest argument against welfare is you have, I saw it in high school, I saw people taking advantage of this who didn't, Haley and I would always remark, we'd be in our gym class and we'd remark over some girls who had 2 kids in high school and had on great shoes, and we were going to hostess at the the restaurants up the street, and we would notice that, like, this is our first kind of slap in the face against this argument of welfare, because they were just kind of popping out kids just to have a steady income, and weren't
So I think a way to solve that is to make it, like we were talking about earlier, where it's a level playing field. And if you have more kids and you're making the choice to have more kids, you do it like everyone else who isn't on welfare, and you get a better job or you make more money. I mean, having a kid at the end of the day is a choice. And, there's a lot of I don't want to get into abortion, but I mean, there's means to not have a kid. So if you do have a kid, whether, it's a moral or religious decision, you're still making a decision to have that kid. So you should have to support it. I think that for our purposes, it should just be, or at least my ideal purpose, it would just be enough for not necessarily basic basic expenses, because I get it's universal basic income, but like $1,000 a month is a way to supplement, maybe if you don't have a great job, that gives you a little bit more money. Maybe that covers your rent if you live in a lower area or whatever. Because I think if we created a system where people are completely dependent on it, i.e. if you had more kids, you get more money, then we might kind of start counteracting our argument that like we're going to have the second renaissance. Because if I have like 5 kids and I'm getting so much money, I'm getting $1,000 each kid, I have $5,000 coming in all of a sudden, maybe I don't need to work. Maybe I'm good with making $60,000 a year.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think my initial thought on that was wrong. I don't think you should tie it on how many kids, and there will still be.
But then you're going to have people saying, "This sounds to me like you don't want me to have children."
Oh, that's fine. I don't. I think people have too many kids already. In all honesty, one of my favorite books as a child was all premised on the idea that you could have 2 kids. That was it. I think China does it right now. I'm not positive, but I know at least one other.
There will be backlash if people start to figure this out and say, "Wait, so it doesn't matter if I already had 4 kids when you implemented this, or let's say I wasn't done planning on having a family. I need X amount to support for my universal basic income." How do you reconcile the pushback on it not being a per kid thing?
I think you're gonna have to look at it differently. I think you're gonna have to the people who already. So the one concern that I would have is the people who have a number of kids already and would already make more. By creating this universal basic income, you'd be slashing their safety net basically. And I think you need to address that situation differently. And I haven't done enough research to figure it out. But I do think that going forward, universal basic income should not be tied to the number of children you are going to have. So looking back, yes, we need to figure out what to do with the people who already make more than $1,000 a month on welfare. But going forward, I think what you suggested is that you don't allow, no one would be able to game the system if it wasn't tied to the number of kids.
Or what if you literally just made it, what does it cost for an extra bedroom down here? I think the average, because we were looking at apartments over in Marion, and I think it's $650 is the average for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and I think when we had a 1-bedroom here, it was $550.
Yeah.
So, if we had 1 kid, we would be stipend an extra $200 a month.
Sure, but I still.
I don't think people would have kids for $200 a month. You know what I mean?
Oh, I think you'd be surprised.
Really?
But then it depends on where you live. Like we were talking about earlier, if you live in the suburb of Chicago or let's say Palm Beach, Florida or something like that, I mean, you're going to be significantly higher.
It'd be relative to where you live.
Sure, but if you had like another, say, $5,000 coming in, that would incentivize a lot of people probably to have more kids and put them all in a tiny bedroom or, whatever. I mean, that might be an extreme example, but it just because we're giving people more money, we can't assume that they're going to, be using that for their kids. People could still game the system by having kids,
right,
and living in a more expensive area and not taking care of the kids.
Right.
And we also have to keep in mind that if there's a system, it will always be gamed. People will always figure out how to game a system. And that goes into, I mean, when people, smarter people than me are setting this all up, they'll take into account fraud. They'll take into account, people misusing this system. And this will all be worked out. And it's the cost of doing business almost.
So there would be an incentive to not have children. And that is very much what the government has always worked against. Like if you look at our tax codes, there is an incentive to have kids. There is an incentive to get married. They want a nuclear family. They want there's an incentive to move to suburbs. There's an incentive to have this American dream, and it's built into our tax code. So you would have to revamp that completely if you're going to de-incentivize the having children for universal basic income, which I think would be an interesting argument and see how it shakes out. Like, would America still have these values that we've always had since I think the last major tax bill before this one that's about to be implemented was 1986, and they were very much about rewarding people for living the American dream. And I think if you were to implement this and just adults got it, not your children, I think that I think people would fight for that as well.
Yeah, I don't care that they fight. I think the American dream is dead in a lot of respects. And I think we need to stop looking at it about what our parents and what our grandparents looked at as what the American dream was and create our own American dream. I don't know if this is accurate, but I'm going to say it anyways. So I read a statistic the other day that said millennials are going to be the first generation that will be worse off than their parents' generation, in at least in modern America. And I think that's absolutely true. I know for me, that's absolutely true. My parents made more money than I will ever hope to make in my lifetime. And I think we really need to start looking at why that is and how we can, reimagining what the American dream really is anymore, because it's no longer a white picket fence. Millennials aren't having kids. They're simply not. So, and, this idea of a nuclear family, a husband and a wife, the wife stays at home and cooks and cleans for the two little children. I think that's that's gone out the window with our generation. And I don't think future generations will try to, go back in the same direction.
Has it gone out the window?
I think it
No,
has.
why though? But why?
I couldn't answer the why.
I'll tell you why. It's because we can't.
Yeah. Oh no, that's it. Well, yeah, that's true. We don't make any money.
So it's not that I don't think it's just that our values have changed. I think that out of necessity, both people have had to work, and they can't. People get married later because you're not getting out of school and having a job that pays enough just for the husband so that you guys are in the middle class. So both people have to work longer, and that pushes off having kids for years. And then by a certain time, I think people just go, whatever.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But I still think that that's the same as the premise of my argument, that the American dream is largely dead.
But
whether you want to
why,
blame that,
though?
I mean, you could blame it on the increased cost of education, that our parents weren't leaving college. If they did go to college, they weren't leaving college with $50,000 worth of debt. You could work and go to school and leave college debt free in my parents and my grandparents.
So if we fix this, the American dream will come back.
Sure, we're not going to fix it, though. They're making too much money at this point. I mean, and even if we do fix it, we've lost a generation, because they're not going to forgive our debt. It's just not going to happen.
I don't know if we can necessarily look at like the worse off statistic, worse than our parents in like a financial sense purely, because there's a lot of things you could do that you could make a lot more money than your parents. I mean, our parents didn't have the internet, for example. I mean, how easy is it to start an online business selling shit, being a drop shipper, selling stuff on eBay, selling stuff on Amazon, starting an Etsy business, just to name a few. I mean, there's millions of people that do it and make a lot of money. So I think it's a shitty argument, quite frankly, to say that we're going to be worse off and like we're not going to make as much money as our parents, because in large part, you can't determine your own future. If you wanted to, you could, you're a smart guy, you know a lot about computers. You could be an online seller and make a couple $1 million in a few months, because people do it all the time. I think the main thing that we're going to be worse off with, which we don't have to get fully into this conversation, is our life expectancy in large part has decreased because of our diet. We're not eating, we're eating so many processed carbs and sugars and things like that we are literally killing ourselves from the inside out. And I think that's one of our biggest problems. And even if we solve the universal basic income, if people have more money to spend and producers have more incentive to push these kind of products and get us further away from natural eating with meat and vegetables and things like that, which sounds like a hippie argument, but it's true. It makes your body work better. I think that is going to be the thing that's like our real crux, because we have more potential than our parents in almost every respect, and especially with education. It may be more expensive, but because society has told us we need to go to school, all of a sudden everyone has an opportunity to go to school, because even if you take on student debt or whatever, you still have not only the obligation to do it to get further ahead in life, but you have more of an option to do it because it's something that's socially accepted. You have an ease of access, even if that ease of access is a little bit more expensive.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And back to your point about creating the Etsy shop and being an online seller, I agree with all of that. But the majority of people cannot do that without a safety net of their own, and the majority of millennials do not have a safety net at this point. And that's why I argue that UBI would be a great thing, because it would spur innovation. But to create an online shop, even if it's one that costs that's minimal materials used, you still need to either to spend the time and money to get that skill. Say it's like woodworking or something, where you'd only need to buy the saw and the wood and whatever else. Where it's the startup money's not that much, but you still have to spend the time and money to learn how to be a woodworker. all of these online shops cost money to start. And if they fail, then you've just sunken all this money into something that the money you didn't have, basically. And that's why I think universal basic income will allow people to have that safety net to know that they can take a chance on something and not be homeless in a month because of it. So that's, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. But I do think that a lot of people can't do that purely because they don't have the money needed to start that, or they're worried that they'll lose the safety net of welfare now if they start that and they all start making $1 more than $30,000 a year.
Sure, yeah, like when we have the welfare aspect mixed in, definitely. But I mean, like right now, for example, Abby and I are setting up a shop to sell stuff on Amazon, and she makes money from her Etsy shop, but personally, I don't have a whole lot of extra money. I have some money saved up from working and stuff like that. So for me, it's just having, the balls to put the money into it and gaining the knowledge and knowing that, like, it's not guaranteed that it's going to come back. So, I mean, sure, you can't teach that in people and you can't incentivize everybody to do that. But even if we had, like, say we have the $12,000 we're talking about now, so even if everyone has, an extra $1,000 a month, there's probably a lot of people that could use that money. They could save it up for a couple months and then use that to start something, but maybe they won't, because I think a lot of people where this might be a problem where, like, sort of back to what you're saying, that they won't have the same potential to make a lot of money. I think a lot of it might be self-inflicted, because if we have more money coming in every month, I think there's a lot of people that will be like, shit, I'll buy a Range Rover. I got $1,000 every month I can make a payment on, it's free money coming from the government. So then they're foreclosing that opportunity to use that extra money. Say they only make $40,000 a year or whatever in their regular job. They're foreclosing that opportunity to use that money to propel themselves even further than they could. So
you're going to have people that do that. There's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah. So I think that, I just think it's hard to to generalize that, like, we're going to be worse off than our parents strictly in a financial sense, because I think that while, like, market factors and stuff like that sort of, exist and do operate against us with, like, this automation thing we're talking about, less jobs and stuff like that. Yes, it makes, like, less opportunities in the traditional sense, but then that spurs new opportunities that weren't there before. Look at Amazon. I ordered, like, paper towels that just showed up today. Like, we would have never been able to do that a couple of years ago. And now that that's available, that's an entire new, like, industry of people that can sell stuff on there, because it's largely third-party operated. So I think that the sort of squeeze we go through with, like, the millennials, like, sort of getting a bad shake, because in some respects we did, especially with, like, the housing crisis and stuff like that. A lot of that is going to be pushed off on us, and we're going to pay for it in school, or, like, higher interest rates for student debt, things like that. Sure, I get that. But I think that in time, we're going to figure out something that's sort of unique to our generation, be it Amazon, be it something similar, like YouTube's a good example. I know people don't make a lot of money on that, but, like, things that change. It's displaced a lot of cable companies and stuff like that. So I think over time, we're going to eventually transition to something that's going to make the high prices we're paying for education and whatnot seem sort of inconsequential, because we'll be making so much money doing something else.
Well, we kind of got to know what that something else is, though. We can't just say, I think we'll be fine eventually. The figures where we're going to end up, that you cited, we're going to end up worse off, are because it's not only we're going to die younger because we're not eating well, but we're starting out later in a different, the wealth gap is so large. We're starting out so far behind with that there's no way to catch up. And I think we can't rely on we'll figure it out as a good.
I don't think we can fall back on we'll never catch up either, though.
Yeah, I think there's something in between, but I do agree. I'm a bit of a pessimist, so I do agree. I agree to an extent. With,
fucking rain cloud over there.
Yeah, I appreciate your optimism though, Kyle. I really do, because I think we do have. So we have the possibility for more income. We have all of these different options that our parents didn't have. But what we don't have is we don't have this, you're 18, here's a $40 or 40-hour a week job in, whatever field with benefits and enough that you can put food on the table for your wife and 2 kids. We don't have that like our parents had that.
I'm glad you said that, because there is a massive need for people in the trades. And you could be an electrician right now and probably make $75,000 to $90,000 a
Mhm.
year starting out. And there's a lot of people that don't want to do it because our society tells us that that is a shitty job. But there's a lot of jobs out there that you could start at 18 being an apprentice. My brother owns an electric company. That's why it's always my first example. You could be an apprentice at 18 and then go to school at night or whatever. And like a lot of times the company will pay for it. You're going to get benefits. You're going to get 40 hours a week because a lot of cities are exploding with new construction. So then you have your benefits, your 40 hours a week, your good pay, and you're learning a skill that you can use to go to other companies or maybe do like another trade because you have this mechanical stuff that's been sort of ignited in you. So I do think we have it. I just don't think we're utilizing it.
Do you think that it's just society that's making people not go into that?
Yes.
Oh, definitely.
It is society, and
Okay.
it's this whole. Again, I'm going to blame older generations that told us you can do whatever you want when you grow up. That was a line of bullshit, and it should have never been started to begin with. I think that we need more trade schools. I think the amount of colleges and universities in this country is absolutely ridiculous. I don't think any state should have more than 4 or 5 different universities, whether those be public or private. And I think there should be twice as many trade schools in every state. And I think students that graduate from high school with a 2.5 or a 2.7 GPA, rather than a counselor saying, here's a school in Indiana that you can get into, they need to say, learn to do something with your hands or learn to be an electrician. It's not a bad job. You'll put food on the table for your kids, but there's no reason to send kids to school that don't belong there. And I hate to sound harsh, but it's absolutely true. I had a buddy who I told him, I said, don't go to college. Do not. You are going to hate it. You are not going to do well. And you are much better off working a trade. Guess what? He's working a trade now. He's making a lot of money. He's very happy with himself, and he's not saddled with student debt. And if we had more trade schools in this country and easier opportunities to get into those trade schools, you'd find a lot more people would go after them. But our culture is, and our society is one that you go to a 4-year university now, regardless of the price.
Rewards, a liberal arts degree is
Yeah.
supposed to be the same. This is probably one of my, I don't even know who said this, but I do think it was someone in Trump's administration said that they think, and it might have been Trump saying that they think that student loans should be at a higher interest rate for arts, liberal arts degrees. And people threw a fit and they were like, I went to a 4-year university. I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. If it's just a higher risk loan.
Oh yeah, I mean I have an English degree. Like statistically, I shouldn't be able to pay that back. If I wouldn't have went to law school, I had very little opportunity. But I think, not to cut you off, but I wanted to get
No, that was pretty much it.
address this point before I go. I think that like sort of your line of reasoning, where if you have like a 2.7, here's a school in Indiana, like we should tell those students, the 2.7 students, that they should go to the trades. I think that feeds into the problem because we're automatically assuming. I'm not saying you are, but I'm saying society in large part, we're assuming that people that are in the trades are dumber than people that go to college. And I don't think that's true. Being an electrician is very
No,
difficult.
it may just be that you're not good at school.
Yeah, no,
Sure.
that's
It's
my only point.
It's an attention and interest problem.
Right.
Yeah, that's my only point is that it's the GPA. I mean, I think high school is stupid.
You have to have a metric somewhere. I was just trying
Yeah.
to flesh that point out.
No. I'm not saying people in trades, especially electricians, because that's I've taken an electrician class or whatever. I had an automotive class, and we all went through the electricity stuff, and I was confused. None of it made sense to me. So you do have to be very smart. But what a 2.7 GPA will show you is that you're not really interested in learning about math and English and spending 8 hours in a school every day. But what you might be interested in is a trade. And I don't think that we need to send people to school who aren't interested in school or, like Amy said, interested for the wrong reasons. You should not be an art history major. No one should be an art history major. We have Google and YouTube now. Learn about art history on your own. Don't take $80,000 worth of loans out to do it. But I do think counselors would be remiss if they didn't advocate trade schools for students who they believed would do better in an environment like that. And it's not a knock whatsoever on people that go to trade schools. I wish I went to a trade school. I'd be much happier going to 2 years of a trade school and getting out and having a $60,000 a year job. I don't like going to law school. I don't like spending, the last 7 years of my life in higher education. It sucked. I'd much rather be working. But yeah, that was merely we would need some sort of metric to figure out. We at least need to advertise for trade schools more, and we need to advocate for trade schools more, because the students who feel like they won't excel in college, or feel like that even if they did excel in college, they're not going to like it, and they want another avenue, they need to be given another avenue. And right now, frankly, we don't advertise it enough, that there are other avenues and there are trade schools and there are other things that you can do, and that you're not like everyone says, if you don't go to a 4-year university, you're never going to find a job. Simply
it'd be
not
cool
true.
if these larger tech companies started it. Like, not to
I'm
say
sure they do. I think if we did research.
No, I think that in the future, when you have, I'm not sure how this would tie to the UBI conversation or to the, I mean, I guess there would just be a higher demand. The more automated that we do go, the more higher demand. These companies would have more money. They would be a larger part of people's everyday technology would be, and maybe they could actually open up. Maybe we might see an Amazon Prime school.
Well, how do you mean? Like,
Well, not that you would like get a major in like boxing stuff up, but like they would have so much
like
money.
they would
yes,
they would like
you'd have a
displace the
Google
government
school.
in funding education.
Right,
Okay, yeah, I get what you're
and
saying.
that
There.
it could be a little more hands-on, where it's not, you have to major in English or you have to major in art or one of these little cookie cutter things that we've picked out for you. Maybe they could go recruit people. I think it. We need to completely revamp our education system as is. I don't know why we're. To touch on what you said, I don't know why we're focusing so much on teaching kids stuff that they're not interested in, they're not good at. We're wasting their time, and we're saying society says that you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to major in something that you might not even want to do in the first place, and that there might not be a market for. I think that we need to definitely look at that's a conversation for another day, but look at how we educate in this country. And
I think a big problem too is that, like, with the back to the whole interest thing, is that, like, it's like you're saying, it's the shit we're teaching. Like, nobody, like, World War II definitely should be learned about, so like we don't repeat that. Like, I think we can all agree on that. But I mean, there's a lot of things that, like, it just doesn't affect us anymore. Like, I still don't know algebra. I took 3 semesters of Spanish in undergrad to get out of taking college algebra because I hate math that much. And guess what? I've never needed algebra. And I just think that, like, the whole college system where, like, you have all these general, like, I don't know how your guys' college was, but, like, at SEMO, state school, you had to do, like, so many general credit classes. I think it's pretty much across the board. We have to take, like, your math, your English, your science, all that kind of stuff. And it's stupid. I think that's why I like law school so much better, because they're not teaching you. I mean, they're teaching you the law, and I think there's, like, I do get aggravated reading a lot of cases that have been overturned or that, like, we don't use anymore, because I think it's a waste of time. And I think in a lot of respects you're kind of getting a history degree, but again, different conversation, different day. But I think that the thing I like about it the most is that it teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to spot issues, how to figure out what could potentially go wrong so you could better protect a client in the future.
I find it fascinating that you didn't do well in algebra, because I would argue that that does the exact same thing.
Yeah, maybe. I just never paid attention. Like, math, I think that's true for a lot of people in law school. I don't know about you, Tom, but, like, I'm not good at math, and I don't think I ever really will be. And I think there's a lot of people in our class that would agree.
I agree with what you're saying about law school, that it does teach you how to spot issues and how to think about it and all of that. But law school is not practical at all. And it blows my mind that when you go and you work in the legal field, how your Southern Illinois law school is actually, it's known for being a more practical law school. But even this, it doesn't teach you anything practical. I think law school should be 2 years, and I think that they need to add a lot more practical courses so that you can actually start working once you graduate from law school, rather than having to learn everything from the ground up. You know, I just don't think they prepare you well enough, and I think that's true in a lot of respects to a lot of fields. But yeah, again, getting off track. But I think a lot of this will be solved that if you do want to go to a 4-year university, why the hell is it 4 years? Why isn't it 2 years? Why do we have to take these general subjects before you get into what you actually want to learn?
I disagree. I kind of I was just talking to my mom about this the other day, about how when I was doing the general education, I was doing the same thing. I was like, this is stupid. I'm never going to use this. I hate writing. I'm not good at it. I'm really good with numbers. I would much rather just start in some kind of taking every single number class that I can, opposed to see where my interests land there, because I know that that's what I like. But I was just listening to something the other day where they were talking about free will versus determinism and existentialism. And I took now granted, I opted to take this philosophy class. It was, I had to take some philosophy class for my undergrad. And if I wouldn't have taken that class, that I wouldn't, it's just something I wouldn't have never known that I was really, really interested in. So if I would have, you ask an 18-year-old, what are you interested in? They probably they can't pick it out, that they have no idea, especially. And that is something else, an argument that I have about making kids choose what they want to do when they're 18. How old are you? Can I ask?
25.
25. Okay.
Way too old.
Way too. I'm older than that. So if you would have asked me at 18 what I wanted to do, I don't think I would have picked accounting at all. I think I would have picked something that was not going to end up lucrative.
But that's a problem with how we've raised our children.
Right.
And
I
I
agree.
think we need to have our feet held to the fire at 18, and you need to say these are the careers that are going to be around in 20 years, especially when automation becomes even more of a thing. I think you're 18, you should be able to be sat down by an adult and have a serious conversation about, oh, okay, you want to be an art major? Well, that's stupid. Do you want, how
agree.
about learning coding? We're going to send you off to coding school for 2 years, and then you're actually going to make some money. And yeah, you might miss the philosophy class and miss the fact that you love philosophy. But like we were
Well, I
talking
just
about,
took the one class.
yeah.
I didn't major in
But
it.
no, but like we were talking
that
about
would
earlier.
have been something that I might have done at 18 that I wish, someone would sit down, a lot of 18-year-olds, and do it exactly what you're saying. Or maybe we need to come up with some other kind of test than what they're giving now.
Yeah, but you could watch a YouTube video and learn everything that you learned in that philosophy class, and it wouldn't cost you $1,200 or $2,000 or whatever.
I disagree. I think what we're doing right now is talking about our philosophies.
Yeah,
Which
sure.
is what you do in your philosophy class.
Well, I did take a philosophy class.
Yeah, did
actually.
you ever have to take one at all, ethics or anything?
Yeah, I took social philosophy, and I hated every second of it.
So
My professor hated me.
So you still had to sit down, and you still had to sit down and discuss your ideas, and there was never really an answer for anything, which is literally what we're doing right now that you are hoping to make money off of, correct?
Yeah, and
So to say it doesn't ever come back,
it's a good analogy to life too, philosophy, because there's a lot of answers that we don't know. We just know sort of why we think that way, or what we think about them and stuff like that. So I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that point.
I could just even with that, I'll concede that point too. But even still, I think it's absolutely stupid. Maybe for some people, maybe that's great.
Well,
If you
depending
got
on your profession, you
Yeah.
do have to take an ethics
Yeah,
class. Like
sure.
if you're gonna in accounting, in business, when you're dealing with money, you have to take an ethics class.
Sure,
Well,
but
why don't we talk about the fact you were saying that when they're 18, you should have this conversation with them this is stupid. You shouldn't be an art history major. Why does it have to be when you're 18? I never understood why we have to wait until we're right, we're going to college.
You got enough going on.
Yeah, and here's the point when we're going to reshape everything we've taught you. I think from a young age that kids should be, one, taught the importance of money, two, be taught that it's important to make a lot of money, and three, be taught how to make a lot of money. I think that it's stupid that money is such a taboo issue in our society, and everyone's like, oh, you don't need money to be happy. Well, guess what? You kind of do, because being poor sucks, and nobody likes being poor. So if you prioritize money, and first and foremost, when they're growing up, which is the whole point of a job, I mean, you get fulfillment and maybe 2.5 more years of life. But if you prioritize money at a younger age and tell them you should be, I'm going to teach you how to invest in real estate. That's what I do, and that's always going to be around. People are always going to need a place to live. Or I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to send you to school for finance, because people are always going to have money. You're always going to need accounting. You're always going to need to know how to count it, how to do stuff with it. I think the problem is what you were saying that we're telling everyone you can do whatever you want, and we're not qualifying it. We're not saying you can make as much money as you want.
But you got to be really good at it.
Exactly. You can do whatever you want, meaning you could be an actor, but what is it? I think it's 2% of actors or less than that are the ones that actually become successful and, reach the big pictures in the Netflix movies now, I guess, and series and whatnot. So we need to qualify it. We need to say you can do whatever you want in terms of you can live the caliber of life you want, but it's going to have to be realistically in some of these industries. It's going to have to be in tech, or you're going to have to go to medical school, or maybe be a lawyer or accountant, whatever, practical shit that we use. I think the problem is that we fill everyone's head that you can study anything you want, and then we keep offering all these courses. Of course people are going to pay for it.
Yeah. Oh, no, I completely agree. I think we need to stop coddling kids. And 18, I just threw out 18, but no, I think that it needs to be done from a much younger age. That's why I said I hated the line about you can do whatever you want. I used to want to be an astronaut. Well, guess what?
Now you can be a space lawyer.
Yeah. Now the most I can do is be a space lawyer. But, how many kids are told how many kids don't find out that you can't be whatever you want until it's too late in life? And that's what worries me. We need to be, I don't mind.
An entire generation. That's why we have all these protests and shit like that. I mean, it kind of all rolls back to it. A lot of it with the student debt protest, or the argument for that is kind of what I'm referring. We say student debt should be forgiven because a lot of kids probably went to the school with the assumption that like, oh, it's okay, like it's all going to be paid for or whatever someday, so it's not a big deal. You know what I mean? So like when you have like when you have all these people that are like, shit, I can't just do whatever I want. That's when you have like an entire generation of people that are starting.
Well, I
to
still
revolt.
think there's an argument that tuition should rise with inflation. It is wildly high compared to wages and compared to the inflation rate, but to what I said earlier, that doesn't mean that your interest rate should be the same as mine, because I'm more likely to pay mine back with an accounting degree than you are with your liberal arts degree. So maybe lower tuition and maybe raise or bump up depending on the interest rates, depending on what you actually choose to do with it, because it's just a higher risk loan.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, because I mean they do that for everything else. Like if you're going to buy like a minivan as opposed to like a Ferrari,
right,
depending on like how much you can put down, like you're going to have a higher interest
risk
rate.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I do think tuition it's too high.
Oh, it's way too high.
It's too high. So I get their point, but I also don't think that they can't act surprised.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree with all that.
I'm agreeable.
You are.
So I guess kind of in closing here, we got into a lot, but I think that some of the things we can agree on is that universal basic income probably should be implemented. You guys can feel free to jump in if you disagree with any of these closing points.
To that it needs to start being discussed.
Okay.
Yeah, the conversation needs to happen.
So the conversation, so maybe our version of UBI is what maybe we can agree to. So it should be, I would say, a fixed rate. Everyone cool with that? Fixed rate?
Yeah, I'd agree with
We
that.
we haven't determined what the rate will be. We'll say, sake of argument, $1,000 a month, because that's what the experiments have. But I think realistically, it'd probably need to be a little higher, depending on
Where you live.
maybe where you live, or like they should just adjust it as like sort of a happy medium for the people that live in the suburbs and in the inner cities that are more expensive. So we can figure that out down the road, and that this should replace the current welfare system. That it should all just be consolidated and used through the universal basic income, instead of having all these different offices and things like that would control it and have to authorize applications and stuff like that. And that it's probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, and that we need to get over the fact that we're not going to pay for it 100%. That some of it's just going to be added onto our debt, and that's, the alternative is turning on the evening news and seeing people starving and dying in the streets because they're unemployed and have no way to support themselves or their families. And if we're going to call ourselves the greatest country in the world, we simply can't have that. So yeah, it's not going to be 100% paid for, and we need to get over that. And we need to start thinking of ways to make it as close to 100% as possible.
And the last point that I want to address that we covered in this episode is that we're going to pay for this by mining precious minerals in space. And I really hope that happens, because I think that would be awesome, and it's going to give maybe Tom and I a whole new line of work.
Yeah. Oh,
Mars,
absolutely.
bitches.
We'll be the first space lawyers. I actually think there are a couple space lawyers out there already, but
I'm going to look it up as soon as we get done. Thank you guys for coming on, though. I did enjoy the conversation.
Not a problem. I
yeah,
did as
thanks
well.
for having us.
I think it's a very necessary topic. And thank you out there, listeners, for staying with us through this hour-and-a-half episode. Bye.
Thank you for listening to How Is This Legal? If you enjoyed the show, help others find us by clicking the subscribe button, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, and sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Come back next time to find out how is this legal?